The Steelers finishing 9-8 was, to some, a positive way to end the season. To others, a disappointment. Let's talk about that balance here on the Locked On Steelers podcast and how it relates to Mike Tomlin and where he is at as a head coach. Has he lost the team in some ways? We'll talk about that with Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WPXI, that and the future of the Steelers offense, as well as our picks for the wild card weekend. It's going to be a fun episode here on a Friday for the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on the video if you enjoy it. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered all season long with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. We welcome back Jenna Harner. We missed her last week, but we have her back this week. How you doing, Jenna?
I am great, Chris. I'm happy to be here on a Friday, as always. It's wildcard weekend. Let's go. Sorry, super wildcard weekend. Let's go.
That's right. That's right. With the extra playoff games that they've added over the past couple years, it is super wildcard weekend. Before we get to any parts of that, I think we should definitely talk about something that I think is we've seen a lot of back and forth for us. By the way, to all the people in my Facebook, my Locked On Steelers Facebook group, chill out. I see y'all. I don't got time to moderate the group every doggone day. There's a lot of y'all in there. I got to work multiple jobs. I don't got time to be dealing with y'all. Police yourself sometimes. I try to police people when I can. But anyways, that being said, talking about Mike Tomlin, there's an obvious divide. Though I do think the divide isn't as 50-50 as some people make it out to be. I think that there's a lot more people that think that Mike Tomlin's doing just fine with the Steelers, and they acknowledge that, like, hey, yeah, sure, 6 years without a playoff win, it sucks, but it's also an acknowledgement of where they're at and how much of their problems have been from him. Jenna, I think when a lot of people compare Mike Tomlin's career to other coaches, and they try to compare it to other coaches who were longtime coaches who, got a lot of respect and had a lot of success, but, were kind of, we didn't have a lot of success to the point that they were fired, like Andy Reid. People point to those type of coaches and they say, oh, yeah, well, they just needed to change the scenery. And then like 5 years later, the Eagles won the Super Bowl after they changed multiple coaches. It's after the fact. But the thing that I always go back is look at those teams that those coaches often left. And oftentimes they had lost those teams. They were 4-12. They were bunkering out at the bottom of the league. This team responded from being 2-6 with a rookie quarterback with a makeshift offensive line, no offensive identity. TJ Watt was missing half the season. This team could have just bagged it up, said, you know what? We're done this year. Let's just go get the high draft pick and we'll give it another shot this year. But they didn't. They fought back and were a field goal away in another team's game from making the playoffs, or, not letting their own field goal get blocked against the Ravens, a bunch of other points. To me, that says that Mike Tomlin never lost to this team, even when it was their darkest hours.
No, and I sometimes, for us that we're in the locker room, we're talking with these players, and I understand that sometimes viewers and fans don't entirely hear everything that's being said like we do, and that's why it's our job as journalists to bring it to them and to tell them things and to say, hey, this is what's being said. But when you're around that locker room, these guys are so bought into what Mike Tomlin does. These guys are so bought into what he says, the type of leader he is. And you talk with everybody. It's not just one player. It's not just the Steelers that have been here forever. It's not just the new players. It's everybody. And that was such a point of pride in the locker room. I mean, the week leading up to this week, there was last week's game, there was so much talk about, okay, we're so close to the playoffs, we've rallied back. But there was also so much talk from so many of the guys, so many key guys that said, we're going to make sure we win this game so Mike Tomlin does not have his first losing season. We don't want to be a part of that. That was something, it was really, I kept saying it was a point of pride from all these players, Najee Harris, Alex Highsmith, TJ Watt, Kenny Pickett, like any player you talked with in that locker room, whether they're a starter or a fourth string guy, had the same message. They're like, we don't want to be that group that does this. It was kind of it almost the way I look at it too is like it's kind of like the way they showed their respect to Tomlin and the way that they showed, hey, we appreciate all that you've done for us this season. We're going to do this for you. And have there been some questionable coaching decisions throughout the year by Mike Tomlin?
Sure.
You can say that about him. You can say that about any of the other 31 head coaches in the National Football League because of the fact that every game is a game of inches. There's the reason the NFL has so much parity. But I think you can look at the way that the quarterback situation was handled and maybe you say, okay, that might have not been the best coaching decision. When we heard from Mike Tomlin on Monday, he said himself, right now I don't regret it. If I go back and look under it under a microscope, there might be parts of it I didn't really like. But that to me, that might have been okay. The one decision this season, I'm like, it wasn't that wasn't, in my opinion, handled great, but also I'm not an NFL coach. I don't know the ins and outs of the entirety of all the things. I don't know if that was direction that, again, we can't speculate, but for all we knew, like Mike Tomlin could have been thinking one thing and Art Rooney the second could be thinking another, or Omar Khan could have been thinking another, or Matt Canada. Like there's so many other factors that go into it. And I think obviously the head coach is the head coach for a reason. My long version, I'm getting long-winded here, is just basically saying that these players in this locker room respect Mike Tomlin, and we always hear just how much of a great coach he is for his guys and what he does for them. And that was so apparent in the way that they handled everything. And even in the locker room after the game, they're bummed they're not making the playoffs, but they're still saying, look, we wanted to do this for Mike Tomlin. It sucks. We're not in the playoffs. We wanted to be there. We were so close. We were playing our best football. But at the same time, we also gave our coach something. We upheld his standard in terms of, wanting to be our best, wanting to perform the way that we did.
Absolutely. And here's a clip of just that you all at WPXI gathered and were so kind enough to lend to this show. But here's Mason Cole talking about just that in the locker room Monday when the Steelers were kind of finishing up and getting ready to leave.
It's Tomlin, man. He keeps us in it, man. We never felt like we were out of it. He always preached, just go back to work and get better. And each week we did that. He's special, man. If he's not up there with the best in the league, man, Tomlin's unbelievable. It's just, I couldn't imagine. I've played for other coaches and to be here and be around this guy, and I get it. I get him. I get the Steelers. I get the city. I'm really appreciative.
So right there, you hear that from them, and I think what a lot of people start to say, and this is where if you have legitimate criticisms about Tomlin, I hear them out, and I usually go back and forth with you, but if your thing is, oh, he's a cheerleader coach, or oh, you just blindly bring up the playoff record without any reference to actual coaching in those playoff games, or the actual problems that caused those losses, like throwing too many interceptions, the offense not putting up enough points when they were the highest paid part of the team and they were designed for them to win, or actual problems that other teams didn't have to go through at the time, like injury concerns. When you don't overlook those things and just say, oh, well, I don't like him because X, to me, that shows you're not trying to actually have you just don't like the man for whatever reason. And I'm not saying what your reason is. All I'm saying is that when you go on these routes and you don't have legitimate things stacked up and you just blindly say those things, you're ignoring a whole bunch of context. So many people across the league respect Mike Tomlin in the Steelers locker room, outside of the Steelers locker room, in other locker rooms, opponents. You hear the way that they talk about him. If he was just a guy that just went out there and just chucked it up every day and just said, you know what, we're just going to give it our good old college try, and I'm going to root for him the way that some people think he is, then they would have a bunch of losing seasons. They would have folded by now. They wouldn't have a Super Bowl win. They wouldn't have 2 Super Bowl appearances, and he wouldn't be a coach that every year everyone's wondering, like, what are the Steelers going to do? And I think that you look at that and you hear what his players that want to fight for you. The reason that they believe in him is because he believes in them and he gives them a shot every week. Here's a game plan. If you execute this game plan, we got a shot to win. That's the mindset that they go into every game. Does it always work? No, but no game plan always works. Every coach gets beat at some point in time. Look at what Bill Belichick's going on right now ever since he's lost Tom Brady. So I think that there's a lot to be said when you actually talk to the people that work with Mike Tomlin instead of talking to people who I think try to make up things that don't apply to the actual situation that you evaluate a head coach by.
And you look at Mason Cole, he's a first-year guy in this organization. This was his first year with the Steelers, and he has those things to say. I mean, you saw the raw emotion there. This was, it wasn't like he was, being forced to say this. He said it, genuinely out of, on his own. And then you look at what Miles Jack said too in the week leading up to the week 18, where he said, I kept waiting for kind of the fire alarm to go off, waiting for people to panic, waiting, this is a normal, the other organizations he's been in, people had already, sold off their houses or, had put their mortgage up and all those types of things. And he said, he was like, I was just waiting for it. And Mike Tomlin kept saying, we just need to get better. And I think that was something too. And, we hear that all the time. We're like, okay, yeah, they're just saying, okay, we got to get better. We got to get better. But
there's actual things behind it.
Yeah. And these guys believed that. And that was something we heard from Minkah Fitzpatrick after too. We heard from so many of these players say, when we asked, like, what was the turnaround? What was it after the bye? They had honest conversations with each other. And then they were like, hey, we can get better. We know we can get better. And yes, there was a lot of factors in Kenny Pickett's development playing part of that, and having TJ Watt back playing part of that, the offensive line playing as cohesive as they were. Like, those are legitimate factors. But I think those also, again, tie into coaching and tie into the belief that these guys have, where 2-6, they never folded. And again, I know so many people, in the NFL, success is defined by Super Bowl, championship appearances, playoff wins, all those types of things. And there's no denying that this franchise in the last handful of years has not reached that. But you go back to last year, and I'm sorry, but was that team, the Steelers were kind of a repeat of this year? Everything had to happen for them to make it in the playoffs, and they almost didn't. If the Raiders didn't, or who was it? The
Raiders and the Chargers. The Raiders went for it instead of taking the tie, and they got the win.
Because the Chargers called the timeout. Brandon Staley called the timeout, which to this day. You were a play away in terms of a field goal from not making the playoffs last year. But I think looking big picture wise, yes, that is a big part of success. And I think that there have been some good things, but as you and I were talking about before, it can be attributed to Mike Tomlin, but specifically what parts of that can be. This season, to me, this was one of the youngest offenses I believe he's probably ever worked with in his entire career in terms of just the experience of guys, which should give a lot of fans a lot of excitement to know the role they were getting on this year, and understanding, yes, there are some moving parts in the offseason, but knowing that you have this really good young core that's going to get an entire offseason together, an entire training camp together. I mean, and I'm sitting here, I'm like, imagine what this offense could potentially look like when they're firing on all cylinders, and when they're able to have success, because they have that bond, they have that trust where we've been together a couple years, we know where each other's going to be. You have that rapport. I go back to even just with Ben Roethlisberger and Deontay Johnson. Ben knew where Deontay was going to be. Same with Juju Smith-Schuster, and I think we're going to see that next cycle of it with Kenny Pickett and Pat Freiermuth, with Kenny Pickett and George Pickens, with Kenny Pickett and Najee Harris. We're going to see more of that. So I think obviously, yes, the goal is to win a Super Bowl every season. How realistic is that? Well, how many people have done it back to back to back to back years, those types of things. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of promise with this team. And Mike Tomlin was such a big factor as to why this particular team did not fall apart, and why, honestly, it's probably helpful going through the adversity they went through, so that coming into next year, coming into the year after, they have those experiences in their NFL careers to lean on.
Absolutely. It's those are the things that build you, remind you when you're in December football and you need to pull out tight games. You know what it's like to focus in those moments and in those weeks leading up to it. But let's talk more about that young offense in a little bit here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, because that's a big focus for this team, is the defense. We'll talk about the defense and what they can do to add. But this offense does have a young core. The question is, how do they keep moving forward with it? We'll talk about that in a minute here. But first, we got to talk to you guys about LinkedIn. LinkedIn, of course, is the number one place that everyone needs to go to when it comes to getting new jobs. But if you're a person who's looking for someone to fill a job, it's also the number one place for you to go to. All you have to do is go to LinkedIn, create a free job post in just minutes on LinkedIn Jobs, and you'll reach out to your network and beyond, to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people on LinkedIn. And you can add your job and the purple hat #hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help you find the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're also brought to you by Built Bar. Built Bar is, of course, the amazing protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. And if you're looking for a delicious treat that doesn't give you all the fat and the calories, this is what Built Bar is for. With the holidays over, everyone's trying to get healthier. Built Bar is here to help you do that. They have a lot of great flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, and so many more. Each flavor is packing around 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, but fitting 17 grams of protein into each bar. That is an amazing rate on all sides. You got to try it out. And you don't need to wait to get a box anymore. You used to have to go to built.com and have them delivered right to your door. Now you can find them at your local Walmart and Sam's Club. That's right. You can go to your nearest Walmart today, walk into the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. If you're close to a Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with the hit flavors brownie batter and churro. Trust me, when you try Built Bars, you'll thank me later. Try Built Bar right away. And we do back-to-back ad reads. We keep it rolling here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Jenna, I want to play this clip that you guys also were so nice to supply us with from Channel 11 at WPXI. Here's Najee Harris talking to you all about the offense Monday after the Steelers are cleaning out their locker room.
We can just see how our future is. We're young, but we're also really talented. And, I think that for us to come together through all that adversity that we had earlier on in the year, for us to finish out the season the way we did, man, it should be motivation for us, and we should be hungry for next year. That's what I was telling a lot of guys on the sideline when I saw the Dolphins won. I just, shook Kenny's hand and told him he had a great year, man. It's just, we got to do a lot as a team if we want to be where we're at next year, not waiting for other teams to lose to get in.
That right there is you're hearing Najee Harris, and to me, when you're hearing that camaraderie of shaking Kenny Pickett's hand and saying, we had a great year, we pushed forward through things, the Steelers could be frustrated with a lot of things. You hear the dismay with a lot of players out there in the league when their teams fall short. But you have a sense, especially from a lot of these young guys, Kenny Pickett, Najee Harris, George Pickens, whenever these guys are talking, like they understand, like, look, we got ways to grow and plan and ways to go if we want to get there. But the growth that we're doing, if we keep at it, we believe in the group that's being assembled right now to be able to go out and execute. And I do think that you saw that late in the season with some of those important drives. And heck, in the final game of the season, Jenna, they scored the most points they had in a win all season long with 28 against the Cleveland Browns. And if Najee Harris doesn't fumble at the goal line, or if the officials call him in at the goal line when he did score, we're talking 35 points in that game. And people are probably talking about this offense like, whoa, what's the potential for this offense? And Matt Canada comments aside, we will continue to talk that to death, during this offseason. But I think the players believe in each other. And I think that is part of that Mike Tomlin's trying to foster is this core that they're all talented guys, but a lot of them are leadership type of guys who balance off of each other and can kind of carry the locker room into this new generation of, I think, when the Steelers actually do have a chance to go be a competitive team for, a title shot in the NFL.
And you mentioned the word leadership, and that was something that moment from Najee Harris with the way that he, went up to Kenny after the game, because you and I are both in the locker room after the games, as we've mentioned, and Najee's definitely a little bit more of an emotional, and I mean this in a good way, but you can just see he kind of wears his emotions on his sleeve a little bit. So after a frustrating loss, you can sense that frustration, as you should, because these guys, it's their livelihood, it's their jobs. But you just saw the leadership and the way that Najee was like talking to Kenny and saying, hey, you had a great year. We have a lot of stuff that we can do ahead of next year and that we can do leading into next year that's going to make us even better. And I asked Mike Tomlin about that in his end of the season press conference on this past Monday. And I said, how did you see Najee's leadership and grow this season? How did you kind of see it develop? And he said, it was kind of as what they expected, but he said what you could see every day was like Najee realizing it and Najee coming into it. And, there was a reason his teammates elected him captain in just his second year. And I think he really started to fit that mold. And I think he is going to be, he already is, but I think he's going to be an even bigger leader of this team, especially that young offense coming into next season. And it's a really good foundation to build on, because we know the leader, and you can say these intangible words like leadership. We know the leadership
Mhm.
Najee has. We know the leadership Kenny Pickett has, all of these things, but that's going to be really good. It's going to be a really good experience. I'm always someone who's a believer of getting experience in really hard things really young, in terms of young in your career, so that when you're 4, 5, 6 years down the line, you have those really laurels to kind of build on and say, hey, look, we already did this. I already know what it was like to go through these tough times. And that was something else Najee said too, going through these really hard, he wouldn't want it to be easy. And I don't think any of these guys would. I mean, if, there wouldn't be that sense of accomplishment. There wouldn't be that sense of, okay, we worked so hard to overcome all of this. But I do think that the leadership, especially in Najee Harris and Kenny Pickett, is going to be a big part of this offense moving forward. And the relationship that they already have and that they've developed among that group, this is going to be a focal point of the team, knowing that right now you have the NFL's highest paid defense, and there's going to be some moves, of course, and that unit is expected to be all of, we came into the season saying, hey, it's going to be more of a defensive. How many times do we say that? It's going to be more of the defense getting their job done and the offense just kind of having to manage things. I think in the next couple of years, we're really going to see an offense that's going to have to be able to compete with the Kansas City Chiefs and the Patrick Mahomeses of the world, the Buffalo Bills and the Josh Allens of the world, the Cincinnati Bengals and the Joe Burrows of the world. I mean, even looking at your own division right now, you have to compete with Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, and next year for a full year, Deshaun Watson.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree. No, keep going.
I would say you need to be able to not only compete within your division, but then you look outside of it in the conference and you have Mahomes and Allen. So you have to be able to add pieces and be able to get your offense to a level that can compete with those teams. And I do believe that if the Steelers can kind of keep the identity we saw take shape and form this year, where, hey, we have a good balance of, we're going to really rely on the run, but we can also hit those deep shots. I think if we're going to see more of that, which I expect to see coming into next season, and again, offensive coordinator aside, I think this is going to be something where in the next handful of years, this offense will be able to keep up within the division and within the conference.
And here's the really interesting thing about that. If the Steelers do pull that off, if they are able to be an offense that gets up there, and the defense is able to play the way that they think, and the way, and keep guys healthy and play what they did when they were healthy this year, that would make them a very dangerous team. It's not that crazy to think when you look at it. I mean, this year, I think all of their wins, if you look at it, in none of the Steelers' wins did an opponent score more than 20 points in 9 games, and in 2 of their losses, they scored, 3 of their losses, they scored less than 20 points. So that's a defense that for most of the year, they were keeping opponents not just in check, but shut down. Like if you score 24 points in a game, your offense did okay. If you're scoring under 20 in today's NFL, you were shut down. That is just a factor. Unless you're an offense that you're trying to rebuild, you're going through things, and that's the style that you're playing right now, like the Steelers were. And the Steelers were shut down for plenty of games. But the way this team was set up, like you said, defense dominates, offense pushes forward. And I think it's interesting when we talk about the $100 million defense, as many people often like to point out when the Steelers would lose. What about that $100 million defense? But when that defense was shutting teams down, there was no mention of that. But yeah. I think what was very interesting, there was a back and forth that was on Twitter, and it was Budda Baker standing up for his defense because someone went after Vance Joseph, the defensive coordinator for the Arizona Cardinals. Of course, Budda Baker, one of the best safeties in the league out there. But they criticized the Cardinals defense for giving up the second most points in the league this year, and said that Joseph, their defensive coordinator, has historically stringent with the playing time of Arizona's youngsters, made mistakes, didn't do things. And Budda Baker stood up for his coach and said, "Don't do that. This is a complimentary game talking about football, and the football, it's on both sides." And he says, just look at the stat book. Don't let the stat book just reflect on the games that you turn the tape on. And his point being, when you talk about complimentary football, is like, yeah, the offense put the Cardinals in so many tough situations. So yeah, their defense didn't play well. And guess what offense was very close to the Steelers in a lot of numbers, and that was the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals averaged 323.5 yards per game. The Pittsburgh Steelers averaged 322.6. The Arizona Cardinals averaged about 20 points per game. The Steelers 18.1. So very similar numbers there. The difference, though, when you flip on and you look at the defensive side of the ball, the Steelers still delivered even with those deficiencies. And that's a very real complaint from Buda Baker about the Cardinals. You look at the Cardinals, again, they ranked dead last, giving up 26.4 points per game. The Steelers finished, I'm just doing my right counting here, they finished at the 10th best defense, giving up 20.4 points per game. Top 10 defense, despite an offense that was worse than this offense over here. And not that the Steelers should strive to be the Cardinals, that's not my point. But my point is, this defense was still performing at a top 10 level this year without TJ Watt, its best player for 7 games, and with its offense putting it in rough positions in plenty of those games. I think that, like you said, if that unit comes forward, the offense next year, and the defense is able to kind of, rejiggle some things on their side and kind of, they got questions with the cornerback room and how they're going to keep that together, or if they're going to add a new piece there, linebackers and defensive line a little bit. But if they keep the same spirit and the same type of play that they had this year with a better offense, I do think you see a much more competitive Steelers team.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I think that is what this team is building towards. And that kind of all goes back to what we're talking about. We're like, you almost have to like temper expectations coming into certain seasons. And I think no one anticipated the Steelers to have a winning record coming into the season. I don't think. I said, and I'm sure we have video of it somewhere. I can go back. I said this team probably finishes either 8-9 or 9-8, depending on what side, 1 or 2 games that are going to kind of be the deciding factor here. And look where they ended up. So I think that coming into the season, tempering expectations a little bit, and obviously there's going to be a whole lot of factors that play into that, but I think it is very realistic to think, and if we see the Steelers kind of continue on the trajectory they were the last, however many games of the season, not saying they can or can't do that, but if they do, then I think there's a lot of excitement coming into next season where it's like, okay, this offense is going to have the whole off season to work together. Like I said, those types of things where it's like, there could be potential here. And again, I'm not saying immediately this offense is going to be able to go toe to toe with Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow, but that's the ultimate goal right now. You're not even going to make it to the Super Bowl if you can't do that. So that's that next step for this team. And I think that within however many years, there will be an opportunity for them to get there. And there's so many factors that go into that, but there's a chance that things can build in that direction because that is the ultimate goal. So no, one way or another, you're going to have to do that if you want to be able to compete.
Absolutely. The Steelers got a long way to go in this offseason to see what they're going to do to, spruce up both sides of the ball. We'll talk about that all season long, but we got to talk about the wild card playoff games this weekend. Jen and I are going to do our picks, and we're going to reveal who won the Pick'em Derby between all you Locked On Steelers listeners out there that stuck with us all year long. We'll talk about that in just a minute here, so don't go anywhere. But first, we got to talk to you guys about betonline.net. BetOnline, your number one source for all your betting stats and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including the NFL playoffs, including the NBA, NHL, college sports, all things there at BetOnline, your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoff, esports, and more. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more of the trends in the action when you visit BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter, Jenna Harner, breaking it down. Now, let's get to this weekend's picks, but before we do got to talk about the Pick'em League. Now, as I said, I didn't know if the Pick'em League on ESPN, the way we've been doing it with the Locked On Steelers league that we sort of had, where over 240 of you participated this year. Thanks, everyone, for doing that. It did end with the end of the regular season. Jen and I are going to keep doing our picks. You can kind of just keep along at home if you'd like. But we do have 2 winners here, Jenna. I got to say, Yap and Yinzer, coast to coast, was running the table all season long, but catching up at the last minute. Granica's picks ties them in the final week. They both finished in first place with 177 correct picks on the year. Just behind them was Double Yoy and Jay Keister. Both of them were at 176, a game off. Really competitive this year. A lot of really good people out there. We had Steelers Director out there with 175. We had a lot of people out there. So really good stuff there. Now, Jenna, you finished in 30th, 166 correct picks. I'm still 3 picks behind you at 163. So I'm still trying to walk you down in these playoff games. So let's get to these playoff games so we can talk through that. But there's some interesting playoff games this weekend, and some of them, some Steelers fans are going to feel a little, miffed about because they're like, what are you going to bet in that one? But I think it's going to be interesting to see some of the teams and how they hold up. And there's a few favorites this week that I think are going to play an interesting role to see, do we catch a super upset here? Let's start with a divisional matchup. Saturday, 4:30 Eastern time, the first game of the playoffs. Seahawks at Niners. The Seahawks, the 7 seed, sneaking in because they were able to beat the Rams late, and then the Packers getting folded by the Detroit Lions on their field. That was depressing for Green Bay, but huge for the Seahawks. Now they get to play the Niners, who have crept their way up to being the 2 seed with Brock Purdy as their quarterback. Jenna, I'm sticking with the Niners. The Seahawks deserve a lot of credit for what they've done here, but I got to stick with San Fran. That defense and that run game is going to be a problem in the playoffs.
I could not agree more. I am a little intrigued to see. I am someone that expects the 49ers to at least win one game, how Brock Purdy matches up against another elite defense, if it's one, in the Eagles, something along those lines. I just right now, San Fran's a better team. San Fran, I think, can attack. They're going to be able to attack Seattle's weaknesses in better ways. And again, shouts to what Seattle did this season. I am a little bummed. I kind of wanted to see the Lions in the playoffs. So I'm that might be a little skewing my pick here. But yeah, I think San Fran is just more of a dominant team. I think a lot of people expect them to do a lot of things. I will be intrigued again to see how Brock Purdy does down the line. But I mean, he's fits into that scheme so well because of the run game they have and because of the security blanket you have in George Kittle. I think San Fran does. They roll. I don't know if they cover, though. It's intriguing. Just adding some more betting. Why not?
Why not? I think we're both there. This next playoff game, though, is going to be very interesting. The Chargers as the 5 seed at the Jaguars, who were able to win at home, beating the Titans and Josh Dobbs to win the AFC South. They crept up, got hot late in the year. Wasn't sure if that was going to happen this year with the way the Jaguars had been looking, but they won 5 straight. The Jaguars did to make it to the playoffs, beating the Titans twice. The Cowboys were up in there. Yes, the Jets and the Texans also were in there, but some impressive wins. And Trevor Lawrence looking like maybe he's figuring it out, with his new team. But also, the Chargers got hot late in the year. They won 4 in a row going into Week 18, where they had clinched a playoff spot, and they rested their guys against the Broncos, and they lost by 3. But they beat the Dolphins, the Titans, the Colts, and the Rams. Now, and they've gotten healthier too. Bosa's back for them. Joey Bosa, of course. There's a lot of stuff that I think that people are looking at there. I'm going with the Chargers here, but I am skeptical because I look at those wins and you think about the teams that they beat there. I'm not impressed by Dolphins, Titans, Colts, or Rams at the point in the year that they beat them. I mean, it's important that they got the win and they earned the right to get there. But, man, people always hype the Chargers, and I'm not sure if I can do that with the way they played this year. I'm picking them, but only because it's the Jaguars, and I think the Jaguars, I think they used their last bit of gas to get to this point.
See, I'm going with the Jags in this. It's a home playoff game for the Jags. The crowd's going to be hype. Trevor Lawrence played arguably one of his worst games we've seen him play, that Week 18 matchup against the Titans. I think he kind of had whatever butterflies he needed to have in that game to kind of be like, okay, hey, look, we got to steady the ship here. We know what we need to do. I also heard an incredibly interesting fact. Guess who has the league's best defense over the last 5 weeks, Chris?
The Jaguars?
The Jags.
Whoa.
That was one of those, I'm like, are you sure? And even the podcast I was listening to, shout out to ESPN Daily, was like, they were kind of like, are you sure? Let's fact check this. The Jags have had the number 1 defense in the last 5 weeks. And I think that has been something that has been a strength of their team this season. And I think that continues. The Chargers, to me, I don't know. Also, I don't understand why they didn't rest more of their guys and why they let so many of their players, including Mike Williams, who is now questionable for Sunday's game.
Good question.
He'll play, but I feel like it's just like 2 teams trending in different directions. I like the Jags.
This is the Sunday game that starts everything off. I think everyone kind of is leaning the same way about this. It looking like Skylar Thompson's going to start for the Dolphins again as the 7th seed. They're going to play the Bills at home for a playoff game. The Bills, I think, are just going to mop the floor with these guys. The Dolphins pulled off an impressive win early in the season against these guys, and they had the Bills in Miami. Now you got the Bills bringing the Dolphins to Buffalo for a second time. I think that the Bills this is going to be an ugly one that the Bills lay on them.
I look at the offensive output from the Dolphins last week, and as many Steelers fans did, and I think that's all you need to know. The Buffalo Bills have so much emotion. That city has just gone through so much this season. So glad to hear that Damar Hamlin is out of the hospital and he is recovering and he is doing well. And I think the Bills use all of that spark to lead themselves on a really magical playoff run. And I think it gets taken care of with an absolute beatdown of the Dolphins.
Absolutely. Moving along to the other Sunday games, and this is where things get really interesting to me. Yeah, I was going to say, your New York Football Giants, Jenna, earned the 6th seed. Uh-oh, she got some gear for us?
The sweatshirt.
Oh, she got a Giants sweatshirt. That's her squad right there. Dang, you don't even got the Super Bowl they won. You have the Super Bowl 35 sweatshirt. That's when they lost to the Ravens. No, that's the 1990. Never mind. I was thinking that was the 2000 year. So that's
no.
Okay. I thought you were looking at that, but okay. So that's old school. That is that one. But the Giants on the road at the Vikings. Both of these teams intrigue me because the Vikings are a team that a lot of people have declared as frauds a lot of times this year. They got out to a really hot start early on with their only loss being to the Eagles. They had a huge upset over the Bills. They had the biggest comeback of all time against the Colts. They beat the Giants just a few weeks ago on Christmas Eve. But these Giants, they've also been a bit pesky. They rested a lot of guys against the Eagles, as the Eagles also, didn't have their full complement of guys the entire time. But I look at this. I'm going with the G-men. I gotta pick them because I think that their ability to run the ball, I think the way that they're constructed, I think that they can give the Vikings fits. They almost took the Vikings before, and yes, they're in Minnesota. But this matchup at this time, I think that the Vikings they've had a heck of a year, but I think that they this is a time when they slip up against a team that matches up just right with them in the playoffs. Jenna, are you picking your boys?
I'm going with the Giants, and I am nervous about it. Oh, I'm nervous. Sunday's going to be a nerve-wracking day, people. Sunday's just going to be a nerve-wracking day. But I think, one, you look at the automatic, it's really hard to beat a team twice in the same season. I think that is sort of a factor in here. But I like what Brian Daboll has done. And I've said that all season. I love what he's been able to get out of this Giants team that no one even expected to be in the playoffs, let alone in the conversation for the playoffs, let alone where they are right now in the playoffs this season. And I think that he's gotten a lot out of Daniel Jones that we haven't seen. Saquon Barkley has looked phenomenal when he's been healthy this season. And they've been a team that even though they've faltered a little bit down the stretch here, they've given people a lot of promise. And I think the Vikings have played a lot of close games. They've won a lot of those close games. But again, those games can kind of go either way a lot of the times too. I just haven't been sure about the Vikings all season. And I think this is kind of that perfect timing and perfect storm for the Giants to go in and get a win, which honestly, that would make everybody happy.
I think
other than Vikings fans.
Other than Vikings fans. Shout out to Luke Braun, host of Locked On Vikings. Let's talk about the AFC North playoff game, Sunday night, 8:15 p.m. The Ravens at the Bengals. The Ravens and the Bengals actually didn't. It was more of an interesting game than I thought it would be. At the end of the season there, just because the Bengals, they needed to win the game to make sure things went the right way. The Ravens didn't have Lamar Jackson, but they still don't have Lamar Jackson. It looks like that his status hasn't changed. It's still going to be, a question of the backup quarterbacks there. I think the Ravens are going to give an inspired effort, but I just think the Bengals are playing too well. They haven't lost a game since Halloween to the Browns. And so I think that they're riding high right now. If they're going to get knocked off this year, it's going to be one of those two other teams that are at the top of the AFC conference this year. And they beat one of those teams. They got their other game canceled against the Bills with Damar Hamlin's situation. I think this is going to be a Bengals win easily.
Yeah, this one to me, if Lamar Jackson was in, I think there would be a lot more intrigue in this matchup, but I just don't see the Ravens being able to overcome what the Bengals are able to do. The Ravens have not been able to put up a ton of points with Tyler Huntley or whoever else has been in at quarterback for this team. And I just look at the Bengals, I look at Joe Burrow and what this offense is capable of, how many points they can put on the board, how quickly they can move the ball down the field, and how they do feel a little bit slighted here. A lot of people are just singularly talking about the Bills and the Chiefs and the Bills and the Chiefs and whoever's AFC championship it is going to run the table type thing. The Bengals, I think, feel a little bit disrespected here. And they're like, hello, do you remember where we were last year? Do you see what we've been able to do since not losing a game since Halloween? I think that they're a very inspired group. And I think that's also going to go a long way. Yeah, I think the Bengals, this might be, I don't even feel like it's going to be as close as I think people expect. I think it's going to be, the Bengals are kind of going to just always steadily be in control by a 7-10 point lead.
I hear you on that. The last game is a Monday Night Football game, and this to me might be the most intriguing matchup of all the teams because of where these two teams are. You have the Cowboys who, at times have looked unstoppable this year with their run game, and then at times Dak Prescott has just made some terrible decisions that have proved costly in the wrong moments. You can look back to their loss to the Jaguars, them being destroyed by the Commanders. In the final week of the season. There's a lot of questions about Dak Prescott. Granted, they did win. They did win 6 of their last 8 games of the season, and there's encouragement to be had with that. But these Buccaneers teams, how many times have we seen Tom Brady just get in there and do some crazy stuff? I look at this matchup. I worry about this pick. I am taking the Cowboys, but I am reluctantly doing so because I'm picking against Tom Brady, and I'm picking a team with a quarterback who's been turning the ball over a whole bunch. And I'm thinking the only thing that can save them in this game is Tony Pollard, Ezekiel Elliott, that offense just running the football, not having Dak do too much, and the fact that the Buccaneers, they've been wildly inconsistent themselves this season.
I look at the Cowboys defense, and I think that's the X factor in this game for me. Anytime I've watched the Bucs this season, going back to the Steelers game, going back to Christmas Eve or Christmas Day that went to overtime, Christmas night, where no one needed that overtime game. The Bucs, I get Tom Brady is still Tom Brady, but I don't think he's the Tom Brady that even a year ago, if you had asked me this matchup a year ago, I would have no doubt been like the Buccaneers, Tom Brady's going to do this. But I'm reluctant. I'm going with the Cowboys too, but I am reluctant about saying the Cowboys, just because this is kind of a really big question mark for me. I just think that the Bucs have lacked that X factor on offense that we've seen from Brady and his group so many years, year in, year out, that I don't know. This one, it is a big toss up, but yeah, Cowboys for me.
There you have it. There are all of our picks here on Super Wildcard Weekend. Thanks to everyone who's played with us in the Locked On Steelers Pick'em League. Keep up with us. We're going to see if I can trim Jenna's lead down to at least 2 games this week on the pick derby. We'll see how that goes. But we'll be back next Friday breaking things down. Jenna, thanks so much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Thank you for having me. As always, I'm Jenna Harner 11 on Twitter, Jenna_Harner on Instagram, and on WPXI. We're kind of in the off season, and now we're headed towards Penguins coverage, but we got a lot of really cool feature stories that I'm starting to kind of compile and work on. So I'm excited to share those with everybody once they're out there.
Absolutely. I'm Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Follow me on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. Check this video. If you like this video, if you enjoyed this video, like this video on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. Check us out on all our platforms. And if you really want to support us, give us a 5-star rating with a positive comment on Apple Podcasts, and you'll get a shout out at the end of the show. Back Monday after the Super Wildcard Weekend. We'll see you then right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.